Welcome back, everyone, to a powerful and emotional episode of Beyond Trauma. Not emotional, but like a release. I have on today Max Strom. Max Strom is a global speaker, trainer, and author known for teaching breathing patterns and personal transformation worldwide. His method is known to quickly help alleviate anxiety, PTS, and sleep disorder. Max has presented at 4 TEDx events, the World Government Summit in Dubai, and the Inner Peace Conference in Amsterdam. He shares a breathing exercise with us today, as well as the group work that he does to help people recover from trauma, release traumas and anxieties that they might not have known that they had. This is a very deep conversation, healing conversation. We get into the nuances of healing with the breath and also healing in community, and how Max imagines his work carried on. It's very special to me, this episode, and I know it will be to you as well. Enjoy. Max Strom, so glad to have you on the Beyond Trauma podcast.
Thank you, Laura. I'm very pleased to be here with you.
I was looking through my body of work. I consider the podcast sort of a body of work on the different angles to look
Hmm.
at trauma recovery, release,
Hmm.
and healing, self betterment. And I'm like, we have not talked about the breath. That's a big gap.
It is, and I'm glad you
Yeah.
were interested in that.
Yeah, no, it's so important. I come from a yoga background that was very focused on breathing. Some classes aren't,
No,
especially, you know
I would
this.
say most really.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times I'll take a class and breath won't even come up,
No,
which is unfortunate. I was taught that it's a central part of the practice. And I think that's why I receive so much healing from the yoga practice.
yes,
It's not the same without the focus on the breath.
it's not.
How
It's not.
did you come to hone in on breathing as such an important, essential, maybe for you, the key component of trauma release and happy, healthy living?
Well, I started with Qigong with a really fine teacher when I was 18, and I love Qigong and I like how it makes me feel and what it does for me. I think it's fantastic for health and longevity, but not for emotional release.
Mm,
I've never seen anyone experience that in Qigong, and nor had I ever. When I started Hatha Yoga later, I had some good teachers, a couple of very fine teachers, and I was taught then to move my chest laterally, like they also teach in Pilates and some physiotherapy.
yeah.
And then what would happen is, after practicing for just a few weeks, every time I would lay down at the end of class, when you rest, um, I would feel emotional and tears would start dripping out of my eyes. But it was interesting because I had no association with these tears. I wasn't also remembering something. It was almost like the body was just releasing um, a lifetime, at that time, 35 years of pain,
Mm,
physical and emotional, if they are different at all. I went through a lot of stuff with my feet as a child because I was born with severe clubbed feet. And so, after only being alive about 3 days, they put me in plaster casts. They forced my feet straight and then wrapped them up. So in my first 9 years, I had plaster casts on my feet, or braces, um, or just a short respite in between. Maybe they let me out for a month or two, and then they'd
mm.
put me back in for the first 9 years. So I suffered a lot of immobility, which children who are active like I was, that was difficult. And then also there were some surgeries, orthopedic surgeries, to try to straighten, particularly my right foot, and so I experienced that as well. So I realized that something was happening by practicing yoga and breathing, moving my chest, because the chest seems to be where we have where we store grief, which of course Chinese medicine teaches.
Mm.
As you know, the lungs are responsible for grief and inspiration both. So after about a year, the tears stopped coming.
Mhm.
They're there every day. I don't mean I was sobbing. It was just little stream, little drops coming every day because I practiced 6 days a week. And during that same time, as they started to go away, the tears began to stop. My friends were noticing that something had changed in me. And I didn't tell most of my friends that I was practicing yoga
Mhm.
because it wasn't popular then. It was considered more of a kooky thing by mainstream media. Uh, that was about to change at that time. But they would say things like, "You seem happier, you seem calmer, you seem more well rested. What's your secret?" And then I would tell them about the yoga. So I didn't realize that it was visible what was happening to me, but it was,
Mm. Yeah.
which was really important to me to realize that when we practice, we're not just doing it for ourselves, but it impacts our society, our culture, our tribe also. And then to finish up, how did I begin doing this? Once I started teaching, of course, I emphasized the breath more than the other teachers where I was teaching, which was the first big studio in Los Angeles called Yoga Works, which was not my
Oh,
studio.
yeah.
I had my own studio later, but I was there right when everything was blowing up. Yoga was becoming popular. Um, so I started teaching there about 12 classes a week. And of course, because of my personal experience, I really emphasized the breath and became known for this. And some people would not want to come back because they would say things like, "I don't want to do all that huffing and puffing." That's a quote by one student. Whereas
Yeah.
others found the value in it right away, especially people with anxiety.
Yeah.
That's what got me hooked because I realized this wasn't just a personal experience. This is something that I can share with other people, and it's valuable for everyone.
Mm.
And some of the people who didn't want to do it would come back a year later because they say they're going through a divorce.
Yeah.
Once it's just like, the emergency room is not interesting if you're in perfect health. It's once you go through the windshield of a car, now the emergency room is interesting.
Mm.
And that's breathing practice also. Sometimes until people have a crisis, they don't turn to it.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I mean, some people I think might block it off because it's too much, like they're not ready for it.
Yeah,
They're not ready to go there.
that's right. And again, there was a stigma at that time in particular.
Yeah. Because as you mentioned with your own experience, the breath work can bring up a lot of emotion.
Yes, and I have to teach people that breath work does not make you emotional. That it
Uh,
opens the
yeah.
door and releases the emotions you're storing now. And it's not
Yeah.
infinite. You won't be emotional every time you breathe for the rest of your life. But if you have a closet full of stuff and you open the door and stuff falls down, you have to deal with that stuff, but it's not going to be infinitely coming out of the closet.
Yeah, that's a big fear I find people have. They're very nervous if they open that world up, that the floodgates will just never close again.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
We have to
And
really
so you
reassure
assure
them.
them.
Yeah.
Sorry?
We have to really reassure them.
Reassure
You know,
them.
for example, I tell them when we do the stronger breathing practices, I say, no one has ever passed out in my class doing this, and I've been teaching this for 30 years.
Yeah.
A lot of people, tens of thousands of people, and no one has fainted, and no one's gone to the hospital afterward. And just hearing that, I think, helps them.
Yeah. Are there ways that they can control the valve a little, or is
Yes.
it more? Yes.
I would say I couldn't universally say yes, but I would say in general, yes. People are pretty good at suppressing, as you know. And so sometimes people will cry for 30 seconds or 2 minutes and then button it up again.
Mhm.
But then they get home later and then it comes out. I get a lot of
Mm.
reports from people who were dry eyed through the whole breathing experience, but they say, I got 10 feet from my front door and then I sobbed for 2 hours. And then I
Yeah.
slept better than I've slept in 10 years afterward.
That's right. I
And
know
now,
that kind of sleep.
Yeah, now they're hooked after that.
Yeah. Yeah, so then once they have that feeling and, like, the other end, as you're mentioning with that deep sleep is a really restored feeling,
Yes.
then
Unlike
they
they've
want that
experienced in
again.
years. Yes. And the other thing we have to teach people, as I'm sure you know, is that anxiety is not a lifetime curse. It's not a virus
Mm,
that you can't get rid of. It's something that you can, for the most part, alleviate. I don't mean every second of the rest of your life, but you don't have to live with general anxiety. From my experience doing this work,
yeah,
I've dealt with a lot of people who, for example, would have multiple panic attacks a day. And in 3 days of working with them, they don't have panic attacks anymore. It's not complicated, it's just not
yeah.
well known.
Now, are there different breathing techniques you'll use for someone with anxiety versus someone with depression?
That's a good question. I find most of the symptoms people come to me for anxiety, panic attacks, and sleep issues
Mhm.
are usually all based in post traumatic stress events from the past. That can be triggered in the present, but the origin story comes from the past. And generally, they don't know that. They really don't connect the dots well. And I understand I didn't either at one point in my life. So that's why it takes an outsider to help them sometimes connect the
Mhm.
dots, because it's obvious often to even just someone who's fairly smart without any training at all. You can listen and you say, that wasn't normal, Max. What you're explaining about your childhood. You say, really? You say, no, that was actually flat out abuse. Today, that your parents would be arrested for that. I'm not talking about my parents now, but I have talked to people where I have said that
Yeah,
this would be considered a crime, and they weren't even aware that something wrong had happened
that's
because, of
right.
course, as you know, the child believes it's their fault.
Yeah, and they have to believe that the whatever's happening is the parents are good because they need them to survive.
That's right. They're the
Yeah,
gods, the demigods.
yeah.
Um, what really made a big difference for me is if I treated everyone like they had anxiety, everything became more successful. Now, a lot of people with depression also have anxiety, but
Mhm.
for some people, well, getting a depressed person to do anything that will help themselves is hard.
Yeah.
Depressed people often have they have no motivation. They'll say things, I've tried everything. You say, but have you tried this? No, but I've tried everything.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, interestingly, a lot of depressed people that I've come across, deeply depressed and medicated, say they have no energy at all.
Yeah.
But you can get them angry pretty quickly, and then you can see all kinds of energy pouring out of them. You say,
Yes.
where's your energy?
I
Oh,
have
it's anger
seen
you're
that.
burying.
Yeah.
Keep trying to help them, and they get fed up with you, and they start yelling at you and say, look at all that energy you have now.
That's right.
So sometimes people who are depressed need real activating breathing.
Mm.
Um, Whereas people with a lot of anxiety don't need, for example, breath of fire, which is often used in yoga classes. I think that's a little
Yes.
bit like throwing gasoline on the fire.
I
But
was wondering your thoughts on that. Yeah.
yeah, I don't use breath of fire for people with anxiety. I do use a hyperventilation technique that I've developed over the years that I learned originally from a Sufi teacher from Iraq back in 97, I think 97. But I've modified it. I've made it much gentler because what I want to happen at the end of a cathartic breathing class, I'm not talking about day to day breath. I'm talking now, this is a cathartic breathing class. This is something to help heal anxiety and to access your subconscious. In those classes, I use hyperventilation, this technique, but I've condensed it and softened it based on how I learned it. We were taught just to do it for an hour, and you would blast open, and I actually fell over the first time I did it. I didn't understand why the room turned sideways,
Yeah.
and that's extreme. And people with terror of their breath, they won't do that.
Mhm.
They'll just bail out of the breath after 2 or 3 minutes. So over the years, I started thinking, what would be the minimal amount of breath that I could give them that would help them to open up? And I've
Yeah.
landed at about 11 minutes. Where, as you know, there are so many um, hyperventilation teachers who teach 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And I think, well, to what end? So we do 11 minutes and we actually take two breaks. So it's 3 minutes, pause for a minute, 3 minutes, pause for a minute, and 3 minutes. And that's usually enough. And we do it from a seated position because it's so gentle. You don't have to lie down on a mattress or anything. But what really shifted for me, because I know you're going to ask me this next, is how did I get involved in using this beyond opening people? Because what I got tired of, frustrated with, is opening people and not being able to help all of them at that point.
Mhm.
And so what I discovered was, if when people open from hyperventilation, from cathartic breath work, if they sit if they sit in a group, if you create like a pod around them in a particular way and allow them to weep with this group, then you get some instinctive dynamic that happens that I'd never read about or learned about. And I think that instinct is the root of group therapy, AA, all the addiction therapies. But if those are usually done with strangers, I would like to see us do that with our own families and our own friends,
Mm.
uh, as a way of life. But I don't think most of us have that at all. We feel like we can't reach out to our loved ones. We're afraid we'll lose our status. That you'll look down on me if I open up in front of you, or you'll run away
Mhm.
altogether. And so we learn nothing about this in our society. And it's hard to express to people. I just finished my book, my third book. It took me 10 years to finish. And it's about all of this. And it was really hard to write more than the first two because it's hard to explain things. It's like explaining eating food to someone who's never had food.
Mhm.
And so once people experience it, then they go, oh, this is what it is. I feel like I'm home again. One woman in one of my groups recently, after we did the breath work together, and some people cried, then we did a sharing circle, and a woman said with tears in her eyes, this is what a family's supposed to feel like.
Mm.
And she was crying from the point of view of, I've never had that. My family never felt like this, but this is how it's supposed to feel. So I developed this particular way of sitting with people. I'll have to describe it to you. I don't think it'll be difficult, but imagine that you're sitting on the floor and you're crying. And very quietly, somebody in the room comes and sits down beside you. And then someone else sits down beside you, facing the same direction. And then three more people sit in front of you three. So now you have three people directly in front of you, but not facing you. We used to face each other, but
Yeah.
that was too confrontive for people, some people.
Yeah.
But now we have them turn the same way, so everyone's looking the same direction. The people beside you, one puts a hand on your shoulder, another behind your heart, and everybody except the person crying puts the other hand on their heart and lowers their head, because through my travels, universally, people understand what this means.
Yeah.
If you're crying and I look at you and put my hand on my heart and nod my head and lower my head, you understand that I'm expressing empathy and advocacy for you, that I'm on your side. And then people will cry 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, occasionally a half an hour, but not very often. And afterward, they are not the same as they were before. And as I often say, this is totally different than if we would go to a movie together, some romantic comedy, and we all cry, but tomorrow we're exactly the same.
Yeah.
This seems to fulfill an instinct in us that that is unfulfilled, normally in life, and
Mm.
the person is not the same. Can I give you a short case study on, so to
Oh, that
speak?
would be great. That
All
would be
right.
great. My listeners love to hear those.
So, for example, there was this wonderful woman who came to one of my trainings. We go to a retreat center for 1 week together. So the group becomes very tight because we're living together, sharing 3 meals a day. And so by this time, 3 or 4 days into it, we've already done the hyperventilation exercises, which I call cathartic breathing. And as you know, cathartic means emotional transformation. Um, and other people had broken open, and we had sat with them. And this one woman in particular, I'll call her Gail, that's not her name. She's writing a book on love, and she's a teacher. And she's a wonderful, kind woman, and a mother, and a wife. Very smart. And she ended up being one of the first ones who would go to someone who was weeping and sit with them. She was a great comforter. But as I often say, those of us who are really good healers usually are not such good patients.
Mm.
We know how to give love through helping to people to heal, but we can't ask for it or even receive it sometimes. Some of us are lonely because, not because no one wants to be our friend, but we don't allow people in close. So after about the fifth day, I was lecturing and I could see her because she was not far from me. And she looked almost like someone who was going to vomit. Her face went white. She looked down. And I thought, okay, here it comes. It took about half an hour and then she started to cry. And I tell everyone, when you go to sit with someone, don't rush at them. Just very quietly, very slowly go over and assemble around them the way I taught you. So as we were doing that, she had her face in her hands and she shouted out, "No, I don't want you to sit with me."
Oh.
And if it had been the first or second day, I would have had people pull away from her. But since she had sat with people crying about 10 times by that point, I just signaled everybody to go ahead and sit with her. So we all assembled around her. And once again, she said, "No, I don't want you to sit with me." And then she said, "I feel like I'm taking everybody's time."
Mm.
And I hear that quote all the time. Like, they don't have a right to cry in this world around other people. So I said to her, I said, "There is room in this world for your tears." And then she really started crying. It didn't last long, 5 minutes maybe. And then she finished and she went, "Wow, that was interesting." Almost like an intellectual trying to think it through.
Hmm.
And she said, I'm writing a book on love, and I think I just experienced it for the first time."
Wow.
And then the next day, her tight voice, she tended to have kind of a tight voice, was much more relaxed. And when we came into class the next day, there was a note on everybody's mat. She had handwritten a singular note to each person. We each got a different message from her. She had done the evening before. And now she teaches this work. And I'll never forget her.
Mm.
You're just not the same afterward. But I think it requires a village. We have this term, it takes a village to teach a child or raise a child. I don't remember.
Yeah, to raise a child.
To raise a child. I think it takes a village to heal an adult.
Mm. Yeah. How do you set the container um, and create that safety?
Well, there has to be some lecturing where I'm explaining to them. You have to lead them through thoughts they've never had before, most likely, to where they go, "Of course, now that you say that, it's obvious." And after you go through several of those, they start to trust me,
Hmm.
and then they are willing to try things.
Okay.
And the first thing I do with almost any group, and I did this on my most recent TED Talk, I'll say to a group, I said, we don't know anything. We live as emotional beings and are taught nothing about emotions, unless you go to school as a psychologist or something. But the rest of us don't know anything. And I'll say, here's an example. Raise your hand if you've ever learn CPR. And 70 to 90% of people raise their hand. And I say, great, now hand down. Now raise your hand if when you were a child or a teenager, you were taught how to manage the emotion of grief in a positive way. And Laura, usually no hand goes up. Even if there's
Yeah.
500 people in the audience, no hand goes up, occasionally one. And I say, for those of you in the front row, please turn around. I want you to see. So everybody starts looking around, and they kind of, you feel this rustling as people have this realization that it's not just them.
Yeah.
So what this means to me, I say, is if somebody's heart stops right now, we know what to do. But if somebody's heart breaks, we're lost. We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You lead them through a few things like that, the eyes get wider and wider as they realize, yeah, he's talking
Mm,
about my life. He's talking about me. And then they're willing to try some things that, if I started with that, would seem too strange.
right. Yeah. So they're kind of, you're tracking them
Mhm.
and you're building that trust, and then they're starting to open, they're seeing a really shared experience. They're
Yes,
not alone,
yes. And
and they're
some people
forming
will
that
refuse
group.
to talk in the sharing circle
Mhm.
until they see other people and hear stories that are very much like theirs, and they realize we're not all so different. And then finally they'll open up and readily share, and then they go through a similar change where they start sleeping. Their
Mhm.
panic attacks stop.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um I'm thinking about something you brought up earlier and a few times about the connection of the story and the emotion.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned a few different things that are really interesting to me. The experience of having the tears and the release that you had, where you specifically mentioned there really wasn't a story attached to it. It was just free flowing release.
Yes.
But you've also mentioned that people's stories and maybe yours later kind of came back to you like, oh wait, that was my childhood, that affected me. So I'm wondering if you could expound a little bit more on that. um, if people, if they feel the release, do they try to add the story onto it? Do they have memories that they haven't had before? What's the
Some do.
combination of those things, and what kind of additional processing is necessary, or is there additional processing that could be necessary, especially if some lost memories come up?
Some people do have specific insights and memory. It's like things come up above the horizon from the deep of the sea, where they feel them but don't understand them, or maybe they don't even feel them because they've shut down so heavily, and they come up above the horizon, and then they can see them. They see what happened, and then they start to understand it. When they start to understand, they stop fearing it, and when they stop fearing it, the healing begins. So some people very specifically know exactly what happened at the end of their session. Some it takes more than one, three, four, five, six, before they get to the bottom of it, because I call it freezing our chest, because I talk about the heart a lot, both as the blood pump, but also the center of our emotions. And, emotions are often used, they're spoken of symbolically as water often. And so the way I describe it sometimes in this poetic way is I'll say, imagine we are sitting around a small pond, and that pond in this case represents your heart. And I have a pebble, and I want to throw it in that pond, and that pebble is an idea, a healing idea. So I toss it, but I don't realize that the surface of your pond is frozen, because emotions, as you know, don't just disappear. They will remain alive within you the rest of your life if you don't express them. So you have this ice over the surface, so it bounces across the pond and does nothing. I said, but if we do breath work together, what happens is the ice starts to melt, and the water that we're melting starts to seep out of your eyes down your face.
Mm.
And then I toss the pebble, and it sinks into the pond and creates ripples and has an impact. That's how I see this if I were to put it in that sort of language. So some people, when they first do the breath work, they have no idea what's going to come up, and then they remember things. Others remember nothing, like me the first time. And others will remember nothing and then have very disturbed sleep for a few nights as the subconscious is trying to get everything out, but it's like stepping on the gas and the brake at the same time. There's this war within them.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it takes a few days before they finally release, and then they sleep perfectly, like I first mentioned at the beginning
Hmm.
of this podcast. Then they'll say, I slept for 13 hours. I haven't slept for 13 hours since I was a child.
Mm.
And it's a lasting change for them. Um, but following up, well, the classical way to follow up, of course, is through therapy. And I'm a friend of therapists. What I mean is, I'm not trying to say you don't need to go to therapy. All I have to do is this. I'm a believer in therapy. You have to find the right therapist for you, of course. And when you do, it's really golden. So I recommend that, particularly for people who have had really severe experiences. But I think also this needing the tribe is also equally as relevant. And I think that you can um, achieve with this a group of people around you what you might not be able to achieve in therapy in a year or two.
Mm.
Because not all of us trust therapists. You know, the way I like to put it is, even if you really like them, even if you'd like to have dinner with them and you trust them, they're still a hired gun. You still know if I don't pay them, I can't come back. Whereas
Yeah.
your friends are there because they choose to be. So I think there's more power in having of opening up around people that you trust that are going to continue to be in your life. Um, I have so much to say, and only one mouth. Sometimes I just stop. Um, so sometimes we need the tribe. Sometimes we can use a therapist. Sometimes you can use both. But I've trained a lot of therapists now. A lot of therapists and doctors come to my teacher trainings,
Great.
and I really enjoy working with them, and I learn things from them too. Um, and I have some really great quotes from them where they will say, once I started using breath work in my sessions, I couldn't believe how much it sped things up. Where I
Yeah.
don't have to talk to Mrs. Jones for a year before she opens. She can open up today, the first time we do breath work together.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy that a lot of therapists are starting to use breathing as part of their sessions because it's best for everybody.
I love to hear that. I'm a big believer that we need both. And I bring in breath work, grounding, all the tools. And wow, what a difference. As I've started to get more confident about bringing in the breath work, um, and as my confidence has grown with it, I've seen people are willing, and their whole everything changes. The whole session changes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So these groups, do they stay together? Do they stay in touch after they've done all this intense work? Yes. Okay.
It's really beautiful. Generally, what happens is I don't even suggest it. I know it's going to happen. I just stay out of it. Somebody says, "Hey, we should create a WhatsApp group,"
Yeah.
and so they create a WhatsApp group, and especially for the first few months, they're in touch constantly,
Okay.
sharing their experiences now, teaching what I taught them, or asking questions. I don't have this in my notes. Do you have it in your notes? Just like like college students. But they also share difficulties with each other. I got back home and my spouse wasn't supportive, and we had an argument. But I was able to
Mm,
draw back on this, and this helped. And people will say, I'm sitting beside you with my hand on my heart, and they know what that
Oh, and that's what you mean when you say like the group dynamic goes on and the healing goes on.
means.
It's like that container continues.
Yes, yes. And what I'm trying to get people to do, my mission right now, based on all this work that I've been doing, which again started 30 years ago, and in particular the psychological healing aspect about 10 years ago. I'm trying to get people who are in these trainings and retreats with me to understand you can create this at home.
Hmm.
You can create, start with a breathing group, get some people to come over and breathe. It's not a stigma anymore. People hear about the military doing it,
Yeah.
and there's sports heroes doing it. So say, this is really helping me with my sleep or whatever. Get 3 or 4 friends, select carefully, go over and do 20 minutes of breath work together, and say, after that, we'll share a meal together. We'll do a potluck,
Mm, mm,
which is the most ancient way of showing someone that they matter by feeding them.
yeah.
And I said, you know what's going to happen if you do this? Some people are going to become emotional. Well, you know what to do next. You sit with them, you
Mm,
teach the others how to do that, and then you can talk. And so you
yeah.
create a sharing circle. I teach them how to do a sharing circle. And so if once a month you get together, you do breath work together, you do a sharing circle together, then you eat together without alcohol, which is important. Um, now you have a tribe. And the next time you have a crisis, you know exactly who you can turn to. And
Mm,
the next time they have a crisis, this group is who's going to support them. And it can go on the rest of your life. And the government's not going to do this for us, and the pharmaceutical companies aren't going to do it for us. We have to do
that's
it
right.
ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not difficult. So that's what I'm advocating.
How young can someone start this? Like what age?
I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did. I get asked that almost every time I talk to a parent.
Yeah. Can you tell I'm a parent?
Yeah, I don't know. Of course, I think you can start very young doing simple daily breath work, nothing too intense. When we teach
Hmm.
children to swim, and that's a regulated breath,
Yeah.
right? Face
Yeah.
down, exhale, turn the face to the side, inhale. So we are teaching them to breathe if you teach them swimming or even musical instruments. You're playing the flute. You inhale and it's a long exhale. And there's
Yeah.
a relaxing element to that, as you know. But in terms of cathartic breathing, I don't know. And I think it would depend on, how traumatized that child was also.
Mm, yeah.
And do the adults with them know what to do
Yeah.
if they really have a huge opening?
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to get over. I know that you have, but I'm saying this to your listeners. We have to be willing to be around people when they cry and not want to run away,
Yeah.
and
Or
also
fix it.
silence. What's that?
Or fix it.
Or fix it.
I think what I see a lot of is we many of us can't be with other people's pain. It's too frightening. So
Yes,
we go immediately to trying to resolve it.
yes,
And actually, we need to learn how to be with it. And when you describe the hand on the heart and the hand touching the person, that's being with. Even the way the facing, you're with them. You're kind of seeing with them.
the gathering came from an experience I had. I teach all over the world, and I was teaching in the Kingdom of Bahrain around 2014, and it was all women because at that time everything was very gender segregated. It's changing now, and so there are about 70 women in the room, and there's a longer version of this, but we don't have time. But the essence of the message is, when we were finished, there were a lot of people crying, maybe 15 out of 70, 20 out of 70. And I said, we're going to take a break now for lunch. As you can hear, some people are upset. And if you want to comfort them, you can. I had never said this before. I just blurted it out. My subconscious just took over. And to my great surprise, this was normal in the Arabic world among women. And they stood up immediately and went over to anyone who was crying and sat with them.
Mm.
All the foreigners, all the Europeans and Americans and Canadians had left. None of them did it. But some of the crying people were expats.
Mm-hmm.
So they sat around them, but they also faced them. So I adopted this in my workshops, started to experiment with it. And as I said, it worked most of the time, but some people were too confronted by strangers sitting directly in front of them.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to fix this, so to speak. And then finally, for my book, I interviewed Lieutenant Colonel retired from the U.S. Army, and he had been in 3 wars. And I was interviewing him about grief, because soldiers know a lot about grief if they're in battles. So he told me that they were in a convoy once, and it was in Iraq during the war, and or just after. And the first vehicle drove over a landmine, blew up, rolled around on its side, then they were attacked. And there was about a 5-minute battle. When it was over, none of the Americans were injured except the man who was driving that first vehicle. And by this time, the medic was already pulling him out onto the road. And the medic signaled to the commander that this man needs my immediate help. So this is what I'm going to tell you now we don't have in civilian society. The commander signals, and all the soldiers run as fast as they can to this injured man and the medic on the road, and they make a circle around him.
Mm.
And they have of course, their weapons aimed out because they're not sure the battle's over. They think it is, and basically, they're ready to fight and die to protect the soldier and the medic, not just symbolically, but
Yeah.
actually. And they hold perfectly still and they're completely focused. And I said, "Have you ever been in that circle?" He said, "Yes." I said, "How does it feel?" He said, "Safest place in the world."
Mm.
Now, it took me about a month to figure out, wait a second, it's not the safest place in the world. He's talking about emotionally. It's emotionally the safest place in the world. So I thought, well, that's very interesting. They all have their back turned to him. So that's why then I modified our cluster, so to speak, where the row right in front of you is facing the same way you are, like a shield wall.
Yeah.
And that changed everything.
Hmm.
No one's ever gotten up out of it. No one's ever spoken negatively about it. And in fact, Laura, I have to tell you that when I demonstrated at the beginning of my workshops, before we do breathing, before I've
Mm.
lectured much, I'll say, I just want you to know if anyone starts to have tears, this is what I recommend you do. And I need 6 volunteers. You're not going to be actors. You're just going to be chess pieces on the floor here, just so people can see it. And so I line them up in this way and have them one hand on the heart, another head down, etc. And then I lecture about it just for a couple of minutes. And 50% of the time, the person who's sitting where the grieving person would sit, they start to cry. We haven't done any breath work yet. But that's how much it affects them to sit in this cluster that's designed for them.
Wow.
And of course, it totally shocks the class.
Yeah.
Already? Yeah, already. We haven't even done breath work yet. And so I say, okay, the rest of you can come up and sit with her or him as well.
Hmm.
And they do. And that's how they start half the time.
Wow.
It's quite
That's
quite
powerful.
beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, it speaks to how the positions of our bodies really matter.
Really matter.
It's also something that I feel like therapists might want to think about um, in the therapy room because there's usually that face to face,
Yes,
and maybe there are some other ways to arrange the space to be with.
I completely agree. I completely agree. Sitting beside them, I think if they're breaking open would be the thing to do. Maybe a hand on the shoulder or a hand behind the heart between the shoulder blades. Um, I can't tell you how amazing it is to see this again and again, and how what kind of shift happens within the person who experiences that.
Mm.
I could tell you story after story after story.
I'm curious, for those listening who maybe they can't make it quite yet to one of your workshops or retreats, but they are like, okay, this breathing thing, I'm I'm sold now. I should pay more attention to my breath. I've been wanting to work with my breathing. Can you offer some simple ways to start, some suggestions for the breath curious?
Yes, I do live, what do they call them now? Live stream classes. I do
Mm,
about 3 a month. So that's one way is you could come join me for live streams. I also have it's called Breathe to Heal. It's a course and that's accessible on my website. I have a couple of exercises that are available for free on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel just under my name. But I recommend starting very gently, like with a very simple exercise. I can lead you through it now if you want to do it for 1 minute, if you want your
I would
listeners
love
to do it.
that. Yes.
Um, so for yoga people, and I'm talking just to yoga people, if you know how to do ujjayi breathing, or as I call it, ocean breathing, use that for this exercise. For everybody else, forget what I just said and breathe this way. You would put your hands on your side lower side ribs, and sit up straight so that your spine is nice and straight. You're going to breathe laterally, not vertically. So inhale now any way you want and make your chest expand to the sides into your hands. Your hands are just there to feel them move. And when you exhale, sit taller. Right now, you're breathing any way you want. I'm just trying to get you to move your chest. Try to get your elbows behind you, and with your eyes, make sure your hands are not on the front ribs, they're on the side ribs. And do that again. Inhale really big, make the chest go out to the sides like an accordion, and sit tall as you exhale. Okay, so have your eyes open for a moment as I give you a couple of more directions. Long exhales trigger the relaxation response, which decreases physical pain, decreases emotional pain, and makes us steady again. All we have to do is do long exhales. So the fastest way, not the best way, but the best way to teach someone who's brand new, who wants to know what to do right now, is this. I would say, imagine I have a soup spoon here. Somebody just put an amazing soup in front of me. It smells so good. It's a perfect soup. So I take the soup up to my nose and I first smell it. So I'm going to breathe in through my nose. And then I'm going to pause 1 moment and I'm going to try to cool the soup. It's too hot. I just purse my lips. And when you do this, you want a long exhale. Longer the better. But for those of you who are competitive, don't do it till every molecule's out of your lungs. Exhale about 95%, no more than that. And you do it again and again. You can put
Mm.
your hand down at some point. But we're going to inhale to the side ribs. We're going to do it now. Inhale. Pause. Keep the shoulders down. And now cool the soup by pursing your lips. And the tighter you make your lips, the longer the breath lasts. Push the air out like you're cooling the soup on a spoon until you're about 90–95% empty, and then do it again. You're going to go at your own pace. Keep going. As you exhale, don't allow yourself to slouch. Keep your spine raised the whole time. Keep the shoulders down the whole time. You just inflate the lungs completely. You pause, then cool the soup. Keep going. And every time you finish your exhale, go into total relaxation in your chest, like your heart itself is relaxing. And we're going to do one more breath. And then relax, breathe as you like, and notice how you feel. That was 2 minutes of breathing. Long exhales,
Mm.
and you start to feel more calm. And some people will immediately have tears in their eyes. Not everybody, because it's very gentle. But if you do
Mm.
feel a little bit of emotion come up, this is normal. The breath didn't make you emotional, it allowed you to release it.
Mm. So important. The breath didn't make you emotional. That felt so good. So good.
And it's so simple. I mean, a 15-year-old that just skinned his knee on a skateboard could do that. You know,
Yeah.
your Oma who's in the hospital with some breathing problems can sit up in the bed and do that. And the person caught in traffic where the car is just stopped can sit there and do that for a few minutes. And you won't even
Yeah.
care you're in traffic after a few minutes.
It's free. We have everything we need right here. uh,
So that's how I would
yeah.
start. But if people are interested in dealing with really deep seated suppressed grief that they know they have, with anxiety issues and so on, panic attacks, then at some point you might want to do some hyperventilation. But you
Yeah.
don't have to breathe for hours. It doesn't have to be really intense. And I would recommend that whoever you do it with, if it's not me, do it with someone who will actually be there with you if you do open up,
Mhm.
who's not going to be shocked by that, but they're perfectly comfortable to sit with you. We had a group recently where one woman started crying, and she cried hard, about as hard as you can cry. I don't know why. I don't know anything about her past, but she had a lot to cry about. And as you said, a lot of people are afraid of crying. So one woman came up to me and she was like suddenly like a little girl. She pulled my shirt sleeve and like a child, she said, do you think she's okay? And I said, she is now.
Mm.
She said, what do you mean? I said, well, before this, all that was inside her. But now she's letting it out around a group of people who are looking after her. So we have to trust the process and know that when people have a big cry afterward, they're not going to be the same after. It's restarting the healing process. So,
Yeah.
Laura, I don't even think grief is an emotion. I mean, if you think about it, for example, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, she talks about the various emotions, right?
Yeah.
That, including anger that we feel when we've lost something that we don't want to
Yeah.
lose. I think it's our natural process of healing that we're born with, which we do immediately after we are born and start breathing,
Mhm.
cry. And everything started coming together for me once I started to study our ancient ancestors a little bit. Because they said the average tribe of our ancestors, until not that long ago, like 50,000 years ago, were small, 20 to 40 people. Well, if you really think about that, if you think of a tribe that's, let's say, 30 people, that's like a yoga class size. But you'd have all kinds of ages. Everybody would know everybody extremely well. And if someone died, it would be the tribe that responds, not just you. Everyone would know, and everyone would grieve together. I think there was no real personal grieving in those days.
Mhm.
Everything was a tribal event.
Yeah.
But now we gather for weddings, but not divorces. We gather for baby showers, but not miscarriages. But in the old days, they did, because
Mm.
everyone knew everyone. And so I think for the majority of the existence of human beings, we always grieve together, and we have lost that. And by bringing it back into our lives, I think we will find we'll have much less anxiety in our lives.
Mm. A really strong message I'm getting from you is, in addition to the breath work, this community,
Yes.
building back community is really what supports this work, and the relational. Um, and it's reminding me of Judith Herman, who says, trauma happens in relationship and the recovery happens in relationship.
Oh, that's a great quote. I haven't heard that. That's beautiful. I
Yeah.
totally agree.
Yeah.
I think we need each other. I think,
Yeah.
we have this thing we call privacy, which has its good points, but also we've lost community in our privacy and then our blue screen devices.
Yeah. And independence, which, yeah, can be great, good to learn, but we've lost that
Yeah, it is.
codependence or interdependence,
That's right.
the relying on each other, and also the knowing that you can't not rely on each other. If you think of the simplest thing, like, where your coffee came from this morning, or any single thing that we do in life, we are intertwined. So we might as well really see that and live in it fully.
Well said. We are a tribal species with tribal instincts, and most of them are not being met anymore in this strange
Mm,
world we've built willy nilly. Uh, I mean, this digital world we're in, this AI world we live in, nobody planned it. There was no
that's right.
master plan. It just sort of
That's right.
evolved out of different businesses competing with each other. And now we just think, well, I guess I have to live like this now. I guess I have to be online 9, 10, 12 hours a day. But I don't think that
Yeah.
we do.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm into getting into the nature, out of the computer. I'm grateful, of course, that this technology has allowed us to connect, and
Yes,
it can be used beautifully,
yes,
in moderation, but we definitely need to think it through and
yes,
really moderate. Really
yes.
moderate. Max, what I see we're coming close to an hour. Was there something that we didn't get into today that you feel is important to pull into the conversation?
Yes, women are more open to this work of mine than men because, as you know, there's still a stigma with men that crying means weakness. I mean, plenty of
Mhm.
women have this as well. I mean, lots of women who also believe that crying is weakness, but it certainly is not. Um, we, it is how we heal. And I'm not suggesting that people should be crying every day and quitting their job if they get upset or anything like that. I think a lot of the times we have to keep it together. I want our
Yeah.
soldiers to keep it together. I want our surgeons and nurses to keep it together. But what I don't want is what one nurse said during one of our groups. She raised her hand and she said, I'm an emergency room nurse. And she said, sometimes the things we have to deal with are very extreme, where there's car accidents dealing with multiple cars and they're bringing in one person after the next that they're trying to save these people's lives, children's lives,
Yeah.
harrowing, traumatic experiences that this medical team, these heroes, are trying to deal with. And at some point, if there's a lull, she said, we can raise our hand and ask the boss, can I have 5 minutes? And they say, yeah, go ahead, go. And you run out of the room and you run down the hall into a broom closet and you go in there in the dark and cry by yourself. And
Oh
then you
my.
wipe your eyes and you run back in and keep going.
Whew.
I don't want a society where people can handle any stress and just start crying at the drop of a hat. But I also don't want our heroes crying in the broom closet with the chemicals and the wet mop.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of a perfect example of where we are in our society. We're
Yeah.
ashamed to
Mm.
to grieve things that should be grieved, that need to be grieved.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not a lot of spaciousness given for grief, as you pointed out there as well. You got 5 minutes, um, get it done in quiet.
Yeah. It's like
And
she
what's
has to
also
go
just
pee, you know?
what's coming forward for me also is how when we shut off grief and pain and the quote unquote negative emotions, we also shut off the brightness of life, the positive emotions, quote unquote positive emotions. Like you don't get to buffer one without buffering the other. So we become really limited in our feeling zone. We
I'm so
numb out
glad you
both
said that,
ends.
Donna. I agree with you 100%. I lecture on the
Yeah.
same thing. And a lot of people who are men, especially, but not only men, who are they're disciplined, they are tough, they're powerful. They never cry, they never complain. But it's hard for them to say "I love you" openly. It's hard for them to show affection. It's hard to forgive. It's hard
Yeah.
to say "I'm sorry." Like you said, we shut everything down, not just the ones we want to shut down.
Yeah. Well, I
I
love that
agree.
you're speaking to the men out there, and um, I hope they're hearing this, and I know the people that listen to this podcast will be called to this work, regardless of gender. So, and I think it helps to have a male teacher as well, a facilitator. Um, I think that's important. If someone is looking for that and they're more comfortable with that, then that's great. I think there's different teachers for different people. So
That's right.
we're glad to have you in this world.
Thank
How
you.
can people
Needed.
find you, connect with you,
Oh, thank
learn
you.
from you?
Well, if you look under maxstrom.com, I'm in all the usual places: Instagram, Facebook, etc. I have a under Max Strom is a YouTube channel with a lot of free stuff, breathing exercises, lectures, and then of course my website shows my entire schedule, usually a year in advance. So maybe you
Nice.
can catch me in person somewhere and or do a live stream. So that's maxstrom.com. Thank you
I
for
love
asking.
that. I love that. We'll put that in the show notes as well. And thank you for giving us the year in advance. I'm a planner, so people can plan out in advance. They can make that time to take care of themselves. And like you pointed out really so well today, to take care of each other.
Yes, yes. Look out for each other. Nobody left
Mm.
behind.
Thank you so much, Max.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet you.
Wonderful to meet you.